Hi, my name is Lynn Horani, and this is my presentation on A Good Man is Hard to Find, written by Flannery O'Connor, and I'm going to be looking at it through the lens of the Southern Gothic literature genre. So to do the literary analysis on this piece of literature, I am going to focus on the communication from author to audience. I will be using the formalist theory where I'm looking at content and message in the study of the genre. I will also look at the historical and social background of the author to give us insights in the literature piece. Southern Gothic literature is the name given to an American literary movement which has its roots in the Gothic traditions of British Gothic literature. American Gothic uses the Gothic elements to explore social issues and reveal the cultural characteristics of the South. And the Civil War often plays a large role in Southern Gothic literature. According to Thomas Beer in the Oxford Research Encyclopedia, Southern Gothic is a mode or genre prevalent in literature from the early 19th century to this day. The Southern Gothic brings to light the extent to which the idyllic vision of the pastoral agrarian South rests on massive repressions of the region's historical realities: slavery, racism, and patriarchy. Southern Gothic literature has specific elements that make it what it is. Some of those elements are isolation and marginalization. There is an element of violence and crime, and there is a very southern setting throughout the work. An element of macabre and grotesque in Southern Gothic. There is a focus on destitution and decay, usually in the form of an old crumbling building. And there's also an element of oppression and discrimination. As mentioned before, in Southern Gothic literature, there is usually a reference or references to the American Civil War. So it's important to understand a little bit about this event that happened in American history. So the Civil War began on April the 12th, 1861, and lasted for about 4 years until April the 9th, 1865. The war was between the North and South of America, and it resulted in the emancipation of slaves and the abolishment of slavery, which, as we all know, is an institution that was very, very dominant in the South of America at that time. The Civil War was devastating. There were 620,000 men that died. The South suffered greatly towards the end of the Civil War, when there was the policy of scorched earth campaign in the South, which basically there was mass destruction of lands, properties, anything. And so the South was devastated. And then it took 20 years after the Civil War to try to, in a time frame that was called the Reconstruction. So this is a very important thing, because this whole event crafted the cultural environment and the social environment in which Southern Gothic takes place. Who was Flannery O'Connor? Flannery O'Connor was born on March the 25th, 1925 in Savannah, Georgia. The family moved to Milledgeville, Georgia in 1940, and they lived on an estate called Andalusia. Flannery was a devout Catholic, and she frequented the Catholic Church and went to Mass on a regular basis. Her father died of systemic lupus erythematosus in 1941 when she was just 16 years old. As mentioned before, she was a devout Catholic and frequently examined questions of morality and ethics. She died in 1964 from the same disease that her father had. She was only 39 years old, and she actually wrote A Good Man is Hard to Find while she was ill, and it was published in 1955. So A Good Man is Hard to Find was published in 1955 when O'Connor was 30 years old. She had been living with lupus for 3 years when it was published, and during this time frame she would attend morning mass at the Catholic Church, and then she would spend the rest of the day resting because she was taking large amounts of steroids to control the symptoms of the disease. Man is Hard to Find falls under the Southern Gothic genre. It has a southern setting. We see at the beginning of the story there is a vacation with the family that involves a journey going from Georgia to Florida. There is also isolation, which is brought up after the car accident when the car falls into the ditch on a desolate part of the land. Prison escapees are destitute. They have nothing. The misfit is shirtless when he appears on the scene. And the description of the misfit's body can fall under the category of being grotesque, which are all elements of Southern Gothic. Throughout A Good Man is Hard to Find, there are many references to the American Civil War, which is one of the elements that you will find in Southern Gothic literature. On the journey from Georgia to Florida, grandmother points out Stone Mountain, and this was the location of a planned monument carving of Robert E. Lee, Jefferson Davis, and Stonewall Jackson, which was never finished. One of the plantations that grandmother talks about when the children ask where it was, she says that it has gone with the wind. Gone with the Wind was a novel that focused on the Civil War and its aftermath. When grandmother tries to entice the children to persuade their father to go to visit one of the plantations, she talks about General Sherman's secret panel in the plantation home. And that again is another reference to the Civil War. And also one of the Misfits' companions in the red shirt was called Bobby Lee, which is Robert Lee, and his shirt had on it an image of a silver stallion, which reminds us of Robert E. Lee again, because that was the horse that he would ride. Racism is deeply embedded in grandmother and her generation. It is so deep that she doesn't even recognize it or realize how offensive the terms that she uses actually are. She calls a young child pickaninny, and she says little niggers in the country don't have things like we do. Throughout the story, there is a reference to a good man, and it is clear that a good man is a white man. And she talks to Red Sammy, who was a veteran, so probably an older gentleman of her generation, and he and grandmother share the same sentiments that a good man is hard to find. And even at the end, when the misfit is about to kill her, grandmother believes that he is good, most probably because he is white. As we mentioned earlier, Flannery O'Connor was a religious person, Catholic, and so in her work there's usually a spiritual or religious moment of grace. So at the end of the story, there is a lengthy conversation between grandmother and the misfit about religion and Jesus. While being incarcerated, the misfit has had time to soul search whereas grandmother never really has. And Catherine Sustana says, "It is only when grandmother comes face to face with death that she actually begins to change her values." O'Connor's larger point here, as it is in most of her stories, is that most people treat their inevitable deaths as an abstraction that will never really happen, and therefore don't give enough consideration to the afterlife. And so it's important to remember that when Flannery O'Connor was writing this story, she was probably reflecting on life and mortality because she was suffering from the same disease that she witnessed her father have, and she knew that she was going to die even though she was a young woman still in the prime of her life. And thank you for listening to this presentation and taking this journey with me through this very interesting work which falls within the Southern Gothic genre of literature. It is also very important when we look at a piece of literature that we take into consideration the time frame and the biography of the author, because that usually gives us insights on hidden meanings and what the message of the piece is. So thank you so much, and I wish you all the best for the rest of the semester.